This is a dream. Is it? She smiled sadly. Count your hands, child. One. One hand clasped tight around the sword hilt. Only one. In my dreams, I always had two hands. He raised his right arm and stared uncomprehending at the ugliness of his stone. We all dream of things we cannot have. Tywin dreamed that his son would be a great knight, that his daughter would be a queen. He dreamed that they would be so strong and brave and beautiful that no one would ever laugh at them. I am a knight, he told her, and Cersei is a queen. A tear rolled down her cheek. The woman raised her hood again and turned her back on him. Jaime called after her, but already she was moving away, her skirt whispering lullabies as it brushed across the floor. Don't leave me, he wanted to call, but of course she'd left them long ago. The Lannister twins were born indistinguishable from each other, with Jaime coming out second as he held onto Cersei's foot. As children, they would be inseparable, looking and acting alike to the point others couldn't tell them apart. But the differences in how they were raised struck a fine line between them, setting them both on their journeys of turmoil and madness. These twins, who were once closer than anyone in the world, became opposites in terms of their honor and sanity. Though it remains to be seen if, when they meet again, it'll be with love or violence. Cersei and Jaime's stories are a long ride, so let's start at the beginning. As children, the twins were so alike they could switch outfits and take each other's places for days at a time. Not even Tywin can separate them, since they look so similar, but things would change as they grew older. The social structure of Westeros is constricting, forcing children into established roles without their input or choice. Jaime was named the heir to Casterly Rock and scribed for famous knights, falling in love with the famous tales of chivalry, such as those of Sir Arthur Dane. But Cersei would only learn to please the men in her life, never having a chance at any of the honor or status Jaime could have, just because of her gender. When we were little, Jaime and I were so much alike that even our Lord Father could not tell us apart. Sometimes as a lark, we would dress in each other's clothes and spend a whole day each as the other. Yet even so, when Jaime was given his first sword, there was none for me. What do I get? I remember asking. We were so much alike, I could never understand why they treated us so differently. Jaime learned to fight with sword and lance and mace, while I was taught to smile and sing and please. He was heir to Casterly Rock, while I was sold to some stranger like a horse, to be ridden whenever my new owner liked, eaten whenever he liked, and cast aside in time for a younger filly. Jaime's lot was to be glory and power, while mine was birth and warm blood. I think these feelings are part of the reason the relationship turned to incest. Cersei learns at a young age that appealing to men is the way for her to gain power, and her relationship with Jaime lets her feel in touch with the masculine side of herself and the power she's been denied. But this relationship was also built on narcissism, with some of the twins' desire for each other coming from how they see themselves in each other. This sort of narcissistic love for others would continue on with Cersei, whose borderline paranoid love for her children comes from the same place. Their mother Joanna died when giving birth to Tyrion, leaving Cersei and Tywin to despise the dwarf who was responsible in their eyes. While Jaime still saw him as a brother, Tywin and Cersei loathed the baby for taking away Joanna. I think this moment had a major impact on Cersei by taking away the main female figure in her life. Her only parent left was the ruthless and pragmatic Tywin, who Cersei would try to emulate since she saw how that way of thinking brought him into power and control. Cersei wants to be a son to Tywin, to win the approval and love from him by emulating his actions. Yet both because of her gender and Tywin's cold attitude, she never receives the love she wants back. But that doesn't stop her hatred for the dwarf who set her down this path just by being born. Yet Jaime would see him as just a baby, showing the most kindness to him as a child than anyone else, which isn't a very high bar.
Then she and your brother took us to your nursery and she unveiled a freak. Your head was a bit large, your arms and legs were a bit small, but no claw. No red eye, no tail between your legs, just a tiny pink cock. We didn't try to hide our disappointment. That's not a monster, I told Cersei. That's just a baby. And she said he killed my mother. And she pinched your little cock so hard I thought she might pull it off until your brother made her stop. It doesn't matter, she told us. Everyone says he will die soon. I hope they are right. He should not have lived this long.
Young Cersei and her friend Melara entered into the tent of Maggie the Frog to hear their fortunes. Cersei had been betrothed to Rhaegar, who was her perfect idea of her husband. While she did love Jaime, Rhaegar not only was a legitimate option of marriage, but was also heir to the throne. Cersei's need for power would be satisfied, and she would live out the dream of every girl in Westeros. But when she asked Maggie for her future, she gets a different answer.
I've been promised to the prince. When will we marry?
You'll never wed the prince. You'll wed the king.
But I will be queen.
Oh, yes. You'll be queen. For a time. Then comes another. Younger. More beautiful. To cast you down and take all you hold dear.
Will the king and I have children?
No. The king will have 20 children. And you will have 3.
That doesn't make sense.
Gold will be their crowns. Gold. Their shrouds.
Mom, we have to go. We have to go! Cersei!
Cersei first meets the prophecy with denial, throwing a potion in the witch's face and storming out. But she pushes Melara down a well, hoping that if she doesn't tell anyone, the prophecy won't come true. Ironically, her actions start to trigger the prophecy here, since Melara was supposed to die soon anyway. And in the future, her paranoia for the outcomes of the prophecy would make her take the drastic actions that cause it to come true. But that's far ahead in the future. For now, she turns that anger towards Tyrion. Another part of the prophecy in the books is that a little brother called the Valonqar would be the one to kill her. While we don't know exactly whose little brother it will be, Cersei becomes paranoid of Tyrion and only furthers the rage that's been building since his birth. Meanwhile, Jaime fought in the campaign against the Kingswood Brotherhood, helping take down the Smiling Knight and his companions in battle. He was then knighted by Arthur Dayne and became his squire. Dayne in the story is an almost mystical figure of knighthood. While we don't know much about him, he remains unparalleled in ability and has no known flaws to his character. Yet his death in Robert's Rebellion, due to a cheap trick from Howland Reed, marked an end to the chivalrous ideals of knighthood in the story, with Jaime especially feeling the blow. The world was simpler in those days, Jaime thought, and men, as well as swords, were made of finer steel. Or was it only that he'd been 15? They were all in their graves now, the Sword of the Morning and the Smiling Knight, the White Bull and Princess Luwin, Sir Oswell Went with his black humor, Ernest John Derry, Simon Toyne and his Kingswood Brotherhood, bluff old Sumner Crakehall, and me, that boy I was. When did he die, I wonder? When I donned the white cloak? When I opened Daenerys' throat? That boy had wanted to be Sir Arthur Dayne, but someplace along the way, he had become the Smiling Knight instead. When Jaime and Cersei reunited, he heard that he was betrothed to Lasso Tully, and they would be separated once more. Cersei decided that he should join the Kingsguard to avoid marriage, and a month later, Jaime was summoned to Kingslayers for the ceremony. But the same day, Aerys would dishonorably send him away, so he couldn't participate in the tournament the same day. Jaime realized here that he was only nominated to spite Tywin, and would be furious that he lost his heir. Cersei felt ashamed for setting it up, which would only fuel her desire to be the son and heir her father couldn't have. As Jaime served under Aerys, he saw more and more the insanity he was sworn to. When Aerys brutally killed Brandon and Rickon Stark, Jaime was forced to stand guard next to the Iron Throne, saying nothing. He coped with this by doing something he calls going away inside. He looks at what happens, but doesn't register in his mind, instead only focusing on Cersei. This would characterize most of his services in night, being forced to watch and do nothing as the king slipped deeper into insanity. Once, he stood outside the king's bedchambers as he heard Queen Rhaella's screams from inside. When he told the other knight that they were sworn to protect the queen, he replied, "Not from the king," and resumed duty. Jaime suffered under the struggle between doing what's right and doing his duty, watching his enemy forces close around King's Landing during a rebellion, with his father betraying Aerys and sacking the city. Aerys told him to kill time, as he prepared to ignite a wildfire cache that would destroy the city. Jaime, faced with the choice of what's right and his duty, finally caves in and does what's needed to be done.
Then he turned to his pyromancer. "Burn them all," he said. "Burn them in their homes, burn them in their beds. Tell me if your precious Renly commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, and children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?" First, I killed the pyromancer, and then, when the king turned to flee, I drove my sword into his back.
Ned Stark arrives at the scene and jumps to conclusions as he sees Jaime with his bloody sword. Jaime had the chance to explain, but seeing the look on Ned's face made him understand that he'd gone too far out of Ned's strict view of honor, and nothing he could say would change that. This incident did to Jaime what being burned did to the Hound, destroying any of his remaining ideas of chivalry and honor, since doing his knight's duty would have ended up in the death of thousands. But he has no choice other than to shoulder the weight of his shame and carry it for the rest of his life. He turns cynical and arrogant, hiding his shame behind spite for those who wronged him. Kingslayer and Oathbreaker become his new names, and he reluctantly bore them as a symbol of his dishonor and shame. After the rebellion finished, Cersei was married to Robert Baratheon, though was doomed from the start. Both had someone they couldn't move on from, someone who they'd been arranged to, and created an idea of their head of how perfect that person was. For Robert, it was Lyanna, and for Cersei, it was Rhaegar. While Cersei was nonetheless excited for the marriage, a drunk Robert called her Lyanna on their wedding night. Cersei's fears were confirmed. She had been an asset who was given to a man so she could please him before being tossed aside for someone else. She once again feels denied of power, and resumes her incest with Jaime so she can once again feel in touch with the masculinity and power she's been denied. When Bran finds Jaime and Cersei in the tower, we view Jaime pushing him as a cruel act he did to save his own reputation. But to him, it was a situation he'd already been in. If Bran got the information, Robert would have immediately killed Cersei and her children. So for Jaime, it was just another simple matter of putting the life of many over the life of one. He's desensitized to violence and cruelty, as long as he can go away inside, like he did with Aerys. He doesn't need to process the damage he or others may cause. His whole life, the most powerful men he knew were Aerys and Tywin, so he slowly learned that ruthlessness is the most efficient way of getting things done. To Bran, being crippled would destroy his life and future, but to Jaime, it's an instinct he does without a second thought. As Tyrion's captured by Catelyn, Jaime seeks out Ned Stark and kills many of his men in combat. Jaime still feels spiteful for how Ned changed the course of his life, and wants to finally assert himself over Ned the one way he knows how, in combat. Though he nearly defeats him, one of the Lannister soldiers takes him out before he has a chance to finish it. As Ned looks up at him, he has the same judging eyes as he did after Jaime killed Aerys, and Jaime once again realizes that Ned's honor is unmatched. As Sansa stays in King's Landing, Cersei serves as a foil for her character. While Sansa's naive and innocent, Cersei's tired and cynical of the world Sansa idolizes, and constantly tries to put her down so she can see the world at the same level. Along with this, Sansa has the potential to be the younger and more beautiful queen, who's prophesied to cast her down. Cersei sees part of herself in Sansa, the innocence she had as a young girl who hadn't seen the cruelty of Westeros' society. Yet instead of empathizing with her, she takes out her rage on Sansa, as if she was doing it to her younger self, who she's come to despise. Ned discovers Cersei's relationship with Jaime and confronts her about it, telling her that she can take her children and run while she still has the chance. Yet Cersei already has the death of Robert planned out. Robert has been the type of man she feared, who would use and discard her when they married. And as long as he rules as king, he will make her feel more and more powerless despite her status. As she has Ned captured, she imagines he'll tell secrets to hang on to his life, but neither she or Jaime can imagine valuing honor as much as Ned Stark. As Joffrey orders his execution, Cersei's cunningness finally brings her to the power that she's pursued for so many years, while Jaime and Tywin lead the armies out to battle against Robb Stark's army. While Cersei's reached the height of her power, Jaime was defeated by Robb's army in battle. While he puts up a good fight, he can't beat a multi-sided attack from Robb and his bannermen. Here we see the flaw of the Lannisters' ideology in practice. They pride themselves on being Machiavellian in the way they handle politics, taking over the throne through dishonor and backstabbing. Yet, when they've betrayed so many in their pursuit of power, it means they don't have the allies to support them when they need it. Though Ned lost in King's Landing, his legacy would inspire his son and bannermen to follow in his footsteps, and defeat a man unrivaled in single combat. Back in King's Landing, Tyrion returns with orders from Tywin that he will be Hand of the King. This is a nightmare for Cersei, seeing the little brother she's been paranoid and vengeful of her whole life one-up her in politics. While he grows in power and outwits her in the Game of Thrones, Cersei becomes more and more desperate to get rid of him. Without Jaime at her side, she sleeps with Lancel Lannister to try to capture the same feelings, though it isn't enough for her. Once again, she feels restricted by her gender, as without direct control of the king, he's prone to influence from both her and Tyrion. It's a waiting game, as Cersei loses grasp on more and more control over the throne, and becomes more and more reckless with her actions. Tyrion sends Myrcella Baratheon to Dorne, making Cersei more paranoid than ever before. She has seen firsthand the damage arranged marriages can cause, and dreaded them her whole life. Seeing that not only happen to her daughter, but also losing any control or influence over an important political piece makes her take a risky action. If Tyrion's account is to be believed, she sent Mandon Moore to kill him during the Battle of the Blackwater, before he was thwarted by Podrick Payne. Meanwhile, she and Sansa stayed with the women in the Red Keep. Cersei, wanting to frighten Sansa, but maybe also overconfident that she killed the first villain of the prophecy, gives her a glimpse of her cynical worldview.
Joffrey is mine.
Oh, shut up, you little fool. Praying to the gods to have mercy on us all. The gods have no mercy, that's why they're gods. My father told me that when he caught me praying. My mother had just died, you see. I didn't really understand the concept of death, the finality of it. I thought that if I prayed very, very hard, the gods would return my mother to me. I was 4.
Your father doesn't believe in the gods?
He believes in them, he just doesn't like them very much. One for her. Here. Sipped. Drink. Not like that. Drink, girl. I should have been born a man. I'd rather face 1,000 swords than be shut up inside with this flock of frightened hens.
They are your guests under your protection. You asked them here.
It was expected of me, as it will be of you if you ever become Joffrey's queen.
After tormenting Sansa in the Red Keep, she receives word that Stannis' army is attacking the gate where Joffrey is staying. In a panic, she recalls them to the Red Keep to keep them out of danger. However, this move nearly lost them the battle, since troops fled after seeing that their king tried to escape. Once Tywin and the Tyrells return, though, Cersei finds out that Tyrion is unconscious yet survived. In the short amount of time she has, she uses Tywin's hatred of Tyrion to convince him to take away his status, and finally free herself from the paranoia he caused her. Jaime, meanwhile, has been rotting in his cell, bringing him to the height of his arrogance and cynicism. He is ashamed about what happened with Ned and how he was defeated, making him all the more cocky and rude to Catelyn when she tries to talk to him.
And Praetor, where were the trees when his head was getting chopped off? If your gods are real, and if they're just, why is the world so full of injustice?
Because of men like you.
There are no men like me. Only me.
My son, Bran. How did he come to fall from that tower?
I pushed him out the window.
Why?
I hoped the fall would kill him.
Why?
You should get some sleep. It's going to be a long war.
To me, Jaime's biggest weakness at this point of the story is not just the pain of what he's gone through, but his inability to be vulnerable enough to tell someone about it. Ever since Ned saw him with Aerys's blood on his sword, he's felt unable to explain anything to others, his only consolation being with the person most like him in the world. But one woman who's the exact opposite of him will be the one to show him where his faults lie and guide him on a better path. By the start of his storm of swords, Jaime's still effectively the same character he was at the start of the series, albeit a little worse for wear. But it needs to get a lot worse for him before it starts to get better. Jaime shines in all the way Brienne doesn't. He's outwardly beautiful and commands respect from both his heritage and reputation. And this outward appearance is all superficial, something he's needed to keep up ever since he killed Aerys. Since then, he can only hide his internal shame with arrogance at the world and cynicism towards the people who caused him such pain. But Brienne shows him an opposite path. Like him, she has no honor, being the only woman in a world full of male knights, and losing the only big position she ever had when Renly was defeated. Yet on the inside is the knight Jaime aspired to be, honorable and just and brave, like knights in stories. And while initially they were apprehensive to each other based on their first impressions, they both come to discover that there's more than what meets the eye. As Brienne escorts Jaime to King's Landing, they're ambushed by bandits, which gives him a chance to escape. He grabs a sword to fight her, and she puts up a surprising fight for him. Though he was exhausted from all the time he spent captured, this still changes how Jaime sees Brienne. He's felt pride from his fighting skills his whole life, like how he tried to put down Ned Stark in a sword fight to regain a sense of superiority. But Brienne meets him at his own level here, not only proving herself worthy of his attention, but changing his idea of women in general. Without his mother, the only important woman in his life was Cersei, who'd been forced into the role of a queen and a mother. He only finds the women in his bed useful. Through just a fight, Brienne is able to prove herself to Jaime and break down one of the barriers he used to block other people out. When they're captured by the brave companions, Jaime loses his hand. The same hand that killed Aerys, the same hand that pushed Bran out of the window, and the same hand that held onto Cersei's foot as they were born. He sacrificed so much, creating an identity based off his ability, that when it's taken away, he's nobody. Just like what he did to Bran. By losing his ability to fight, he loses any possibility of knighthood, regardless of his character. Jaime becomes empty inside after this, having no outward way to show his identity. But because of his emptiness, he's able to start new and recreate himself from the bottom up. The members of the Brave Companions try to assault Brienne, and Jaime offers her the only advice he can: go away inside. He feels lost without his identity, and doesn't see any purpose in the well-being of Brienne after what he's gone through. All he tells her is to try not to resist so she won't be killed. Yet she fights anyway, making Jaime yell out that he'll reward the Brave Companions with money from Casterly Rock. Despite his apathy at his lowest point, Jaime finds in himself here that he still genuinely wants to do good, even at his lowest. In the bathhouse at Harrenhal, Jaime's free to tell Brienne everything, partially because of his wound and heat-inflicted state of mind, but also the fact that when he has nothing else to lose, he can finally tell his side of the story. Though he still doesn't see her as that important to him at this point, the fact that he can get rid of this burden he's carried for decades is what matters. When he leaves, he's metaphorically clean, enough to make him stop defining himself by his past and start anew.
If this is true, why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you tell Lord Stark?
Stark? You think the Honorable Ned Stark wanted to hear my side? He judged me guilty the moment he set eyes on me. By what right does the wolf judge the lion? By what right?
The Kingslayer!
Jaime. My name's Jaime.
He's given a chance to leave and return to King's Landing, but along the way he has a dream that makes him turn around. I won't go super in depth on it now, but in the beginning of the dream he sees Brienne chained up under Casterly Rock and frees her to escape. On their way, people from his past criticize him for killing Aerys, and Brienne is the one to fight them off when he can't. Motivated by this, he returns back to save Brienne. It's like a classic knight's fairy tale. He hears a maiden in trouble and rides off on his horse to protect her from the beast. But Jaime here is beyond the false ideals of honor and chivalry. He listens to his heart first and does what's right for that reason alone. He frees her from Harrenhal, and they continue on their way to King's Landing. Cersei, meanwhile, has felt less and less in power despite her position. Tywin makes it clear that he doesn't believe she's fit to rule or deserves to be on the small council. He even brings up the idea of remarrying her to someone else for political reasons. She gets more and more frustrated against Tyrion, forcing him to marry Sansa to try to win back her father's approval. Yet, when Joffrey's wedding comes, she is still powerless to stop what's in her mind, an attack from Tyrion. The death of her first child shows her how little control she has over the situation, which prompts her to respond even more rashly through the trial of Tyrion. When Jaime and Cersei reunite in the sept where Joffrey's body is, Jaime tries to resume the same incept he's kept up with Cersei his whole life, but she doesn't seem the same anymore. His time with Brienne has made Jaime grow distasteful of the Machiavellian, scheming way of the Lannisters, and Cersei, no longer being the only woman he's truly known, is no longer the other half of him like she once was. When Tywin gives him a Valyrian steel sword and asks him to leave the Kingsguard to become heir to Casterly Rock, he refuses to leave, learning from Brienne the true purpose and value of knighthood. He meets again with the Kingsguard, trying to remind them of the true duties Brienne showed him. Jaime passes down the sword to Brienne, naming it Oathkeeper to remind them both of the strict internal morality that makes a true knight. He sends her on a mission to protect Sansa from Cersei, no longer ignoring his sister's cruelty out of love. When Tyrion fails the trial by combat, he arranges for his escape, being the only one who believes his innocence. I think a lot of this comes from his new resentment for Cersei, but Jaime has also had a soft spot for Tyrion. Though he was never particularly loving to him, he never saw him as a demon like Cersei had, and Tyrion still has some fond memories of him from childhood. However it happened, it was enough to convince Jaime, whose own biological son was killed, to have pity on the man who would go so far as to confess to being guilty after Jaime frees him. When Jaime tells him the true story of Tysha, and how she was never paid off like Tywin had told him, Tyrion reacts with anger. Not only does he claim to be guilty to spite Jaime, but he tells him about Cersei's secret relationships she had while Jaime was gone, before killing Tywin and leaving. For Jaime, this would only fuel more spite for Cersei, and disillusion him from the love he had once viewed her through. But to Cersei, this would push her further into paranoia, once again feeling helpless as Tyrion takes the life of someone close to her. Though she falls deeper and deeper into madness, without Tywin restricting her, she can rise further into power and rule as queen without restrictions. Jaime starts the book with a hostility towards the Lannisters in politics that's dangerous to those around him. Cersei grows more and more distant from him after he refuses to work as her hand, and puts her desire for power over her love for him. While he can, Jaime tries to leave a better legacy for the Kingsguard and knighthood in general, but their conflicting desires are going to separate them in an irreversible way. Jaime tries to bring some change to the Kingsguard while he can, especially since he decided his legacy was his to create. When he saw the White Book of the Kingsguard, he understood that it was his mission to live up to the knightly ideas he had as a child, which Brienne reintroduced him to. I go more into this in my Loras video, but he does see a younger version of himself in the Knight of the Flowers, trying to give him guidance but failing to stop his reckless attitude from putting him in danger later. When Cersei believes he may be a threat to her leadership, he's sent out to the Riverlands, but under the condition that he can bring Ilyn Payne with him. Because Ilyn Payne is mute, Jaime can spend his trip training his left hand with him, while eventually opening up to him about his relationship with Cersei. I explore more of this in my Ilyn video as well, but he has also had a tragic history with corruption in King's Landing, especially with Tywin. He's able to let more of this weight off his shoulders, absolving himself of the shame he's carried for so long. I won't go too much into the politicking in Jaime's story, but this time alone lets the spite within him fester against Cersei, feeling jealousy and betrayal for how she slept with other men while he was gone. Cersei, meanwhile, is at the peak of her power. Without the restrictions of a husband or father, she sits with essentially ultimate power as Queen Regent. But this has come after years of agonizing wait as she fell deeper into madness. By the time she sits on the throne, she's full of paranoia of the prophecy, and for her children, causing rash judgments and poor decision making. To go through it quickly, she replaces the Small Council, refuses to pay debts to the Iron Bank and the Faith, bringing Arryn Waters to power who would then steal her fleet, and bringing back the Faith militant. But, though she should be the strongest person in Westeros, she feels more and more scared and alone due to her circumstances. But she has spent too much time and effort on gaining this power that she'll do anything she can to hold on to it. I waited, and so can he. I waited half my life. She had played the dutiful daughter, the blushing bride, the pliant wife. She had suffered Robert's drunken groping, Jaime's jealousy, Renly's mockery, Varys with his titters, Stannis endlessly grinding his teeth. She had contended with Jon Arryn, Ned Stark, and her vile, treacherous, murderous dwarf brother, all the while promising herself that one day it would be her turn. If Margaery Tyrell thinks to cheat me of my hour in the sun, she had bloody well think again. The Tyrells have stayed a problem for far too long in Cersei's eyes, overstaying their welcome as Margaery weds Tommen to challenge Cersei. She likely believes Margaery's the younger, more beautiful queen who will cast her down, and so she does everything she can to take her down. She grows paranoid of her influence, not only trying to keep her away from Tommen, but also trying to separate him from Loras, who tries to win his approval by teaching him jousting. Her jealousy and fear of Margaery provokes Cersei to take more offensive actions against her, though Margaery begins to overtake her in the eyes of the common people. Without Jaime by her side, she feels a lack of power, the masculine side of her that she tried to connect with as a child. She sleeps with multiple men for political reasons, and even with Tywin of Myr, both to build their relationship and to try to feel the type of masculine power she thinks she lacks. She tries to hurt Tyenna in the same way Robert did to her, and thinks to herself that Robert would have used her for an hour before forgetting her name. Her beauty becomes her power when she can use it to manipulate others through it, though that power, just like Jaime's swordsmanship, will eventually be lost and cripple her. Like King Aerys in his last days, Cersei sees traitors and enemies everywhere she looks, becoming more and more critical of those who offer any resistance to her. She sends some spies to Qyburn, who uses them for his twisted experiments, and constantly lives in fear that Tyrion will come at night and kill her in her sleep. People notice that she burns the Tower of the Hand where he was last seen. She finds the same pleasure that King Aerys did when he burned those he saw as treacherous. This constant feeling of backstabbing and criticism only furthers her bitterness at society and politics until it reaches a boiling point. When Tywin Lannister spoke, men obeyed. When Cersei spoke, they felt free to counsel her, to contradict her, even refuse her. It is all because I am a woman, because I cannot fight them with a sword. They gave Robert more respect than they give me, and Robert was a witless sot. She would not suffer it, especially not from Jaime. I need to rid myself of him, and soon. Once upon a time, she had dreamt that the two of them might rule the 7 kingdoms side by side, but Jaime had become more of a hindrance than a help. Cersei almost has everything settled for a moment. Arryn Waters and Loras Tyrell try to take Dragonstone, taking away competition for Tommen's attention. By seducing Osney Kettleblack, she is able to use him to free Margaery and put her on trial by the 5th. But since Osney was tortured by an unconvinced High Sparrow, he revealed Cersei's crimes, causing her to have to wait for a trial by combat in the Sept. She sends a letter to Jaime asking for his support in the trial by combat, but he burns it and gives no reply. Outside, Cersei can hear the common people cry out for Queen Margaery, who's won their support. Cersei finds herself in the same problem the Lannisters had faced before. Like Tywin, her cruel and backstabbing politics created more enemies than friends, and when trouble arose, no one was there to support her. Even her brother, who she'd grown so close with, had grown bitter of her and refused to support her when it meant life or death. But Cersei can't accept an end like that, and will continue to fight as long as she can. Cersei confesses whatever she can to the High Sparrow, but it is to no avail. She's at risk of losing everything she's dedicated her whole life to, and everything she desperately clings to, like her children and her pride, seem to be slipping away. She's forced to take a walk of shame through the city to absolve her of her crime. This is to Cersei what losing a hand was to Jaime. Her identity and power were all built on her beauty, which is essentially taken away by this walk. There's a strategic loss here, as she can no longer seduce others for political reasons, but most of the damage done here is internal. In front of the common people, she feels like the beauty that's defined her isn't enough, and many of the common people lose respect for her after seeing what she really looks like. One might expect her to strike back twice as hard after this loss of pride, but instead it just causes profound shame and sorrow inside her. After this, it's mentioned that she spends a third of her time in the bath, never feeling clean after the incident. This moment parallels Jaime's in the bath at Harrenhal after losing his hand. Though at this moment, Cersei's completely alone and has no refuge from her shame and emptiness. But to make it worse, Kevin is assassinated by Varys, who uses a crossbow to make it seem like Tyrion did it, knowing it'll further push Cersei into madness. Jaime, meanwhile, has been resolving the conflict in the Riverlands. He pays no mind to Cersei's problems, ironically punishing her with his absence, despite the fact that she was the one who sent him away. But once he's resolved the situation, he meets Brienne, who tells him that the Hound is holding Sansa captive, and he disappears with her. This is the last we've heard from him though, as Brienne takes him to Lady Stoneheart, who wants revenge on the Lannisters for the Red Wedding. That's where we see the characters last in the story, both in life or death scenarios hundreds of miles apart. We see here the distance, both physical and emotional, between them, since the most dire moments neither of them is there to help. But as for their future, we can only guess on whether the Lannister twins will reunite, or meet their ends separately. Jaime and Cersei's futures are difficult to predict. As with Martin's writing, it's hard to tell how he views the characters, and whether they deserve a good ending. For Jaime, while we see him as a redemptive hero in A Storm of Swords, he spends most of the next book politicking and negotiating, being arguably cruel in some instances. While he's changed a lot in his own eyes, he hasn't proved himself to be much different to most people, which could set him up for either redemption or failure, depending on the outcome. With Cersei, we have the vague idea that her downfall and death are coming, but how it'll all play out is still up for debate. But the fact that I've gone so far in this video without mentioning the idea that the twins are actually children of King Aerys is ridiculous. We know that he pushed a lot of boundaries in how he treated Joanna Lannister, enough to have her sent away from court. And with the time frames, it's not impossible that the real parentage might be different than we thought. But there are also more thematic reasons why this would work. Tyrion being the only true child of Tywin would add extra salt on the wound. For Tywin to have his disgraceful child be his own would not only add irony, but is also something that characters have pointed out, how Tyrion takes after his father in personality. But for Cersei, it gives more of a reason for her downfall. Madness is frequent among Targaryens, and Cersei is noted by many characters, even Jaime, to have the same affinity for fire and burning that Aerys did. This would also explain her attraction to not only Jaime but Rhaegar, who are both related to her, since incest is a tradition of the Targaryens. For Cersei, this information would mean her downfall could come similarly to King Aerys's, with her descent into madness ultimately prompting her to make a fatal mistake. There is still wildfire, which Aerys planted under King's Landing, which Cersei could threaten to set off. In my Loras video, I mentioned how this parallels with Jaime, meaning he could take the Kingslayer role in this situation, coming for revenge on Cersei and killing her before the wildfire set off. But the wildfire scenario could play out in many different ways, with there also being a large possibility that Jon Connington could be the one to set it off, due to grayscale-induced insanity. But either way, her affinity for fire will be part of her downfall. With a younger, more beautiful queen scenario, I think Daenerys would be the one to fill that role. A three-way Targaryen clash with those two and young Griff would make sense, especially with the show's ending. But as for the Valonqar, I doubt it would be Jaime as many suspect. I think for him to finally grow as a person, he needs to let go of Cersei, and coming back to kill her seems like an unfitting end to his redemption. But if I had to give an answer other than Loras, it would be Tyrion. It would be the most terrifying possible ending for her, and the most poetic for the reader. As for Jaime, we can get some idea of where his story goes from his dream. When he and Brienne are escaping Casterly Rock, he's faced by some of the Kingsguard and Rhaegar who try to stop him. Brienne and Jaime try to fight back, but Jaime's sword loses its fire, and Brienne has to keep fighting. Now the shadows that confront him are similar to the others in the way they're described, having no sound when they move, and even looking similar to the others. He peered into the gloom until he saw it too. Something was moving through the darkness. He could not quite make it out. A man on a horse. No, two. Two riders, side by side. Down here beneath the rock? It made no sense. Yet there came two riders on pale horses, men and mounts both armored. The destriers emerged from the blackness at a slow walk. They made no sound, Jaime realized. No splashing, no clink of mail, no clop of hoof. He remembered Eddard Stark, riding the length of Aerys' throne room, wrapped in silence. Only his eyes had spoken. A lord's eyes, cold and grey and full of judgment. "Is it you, Stark?" Jaime called. "Come ahead. I never feared you living. I do not fear you dead." Brienne touched his arm. There were more. He saw them too. They were armored all in snow, it seemed to him, and ribbons of mist rolled back from their shoulders. The visors of their helms were closed, but Jaime Lannister did not need to look upon their faces to know them. So Jaime's story will have a battle against the others at some point. But to take it a step further, I also think Jaime will be Azor Ahai. While Jon Snow and Daenerys had pretty good evidence to support them, I think having a trio between Stark, Lannister, and Targaryen would fit well, and along with that they'd all be Targaryens, the three heads of the dragon. But along with that, him being the Kingslayer means he could be also the one to ultimately kill the Night King. It would represent what Tyrion said to Jon, about turning what others call you into your strength. He could redeem himself in the eyes of the kingdom, and turn the name Kingslayer into a source of pride rather than shame. This also ties in with his mythological inspiration. Tyr, the Norse god of war, loses his hand to a wolf in a display of bravery. When Ragnarok comes and the gods fight for the sake of the world, early stories of Tyr as a central figure, while later editions added Thor and Odin and made them lose the battle. Early tellings had Tyr emerge victorious from the conflict. With Jaime representing Tyr, he could be one of the main heroes during the long night. The Lannister twins' destinies are interwoven, creating one of the most nuanced and complex relationships in the story. Both characters dramatically change in opposite directions, with Jaime rediscovering his younger self's true vision of knighthood and living by it, while Cersei's paranoia creeps up on her and drives her further and further into madness and despair. In these characters, Martin succeeds in turning characters who were once complete villains into morally grey, fleshed out characters with the potential for either salvation or destruction.